Uncle Trev and the Springs by Jack Lasenby. I'm getting a lift up to Matamata with Mrs. Wilson, Mum said. There's a sale at Trent's. Mrs. Simpson and Mrs. Mitchell are going too. You'll be all right. I'll get some material for your dressing gown, and I might bring home some slippers for you to try. Now, if your uncle comes in, the tins are full. There's some of that Louise cake he likes, but give him some scones first. He can fill up on them and have the cake afterwards. Oh, she said, and ask him if he's remembered to put in some potatoes for us. He won't have thought to plant his yet, but it'll remind him it's time that he did. Now you keep yourself warm, and don't you dare go outside. Somebody tooted. She popped on her hat with a bent feather, clapped her purse under her arm, and ran down the side of the house. The gate clicked. Car door slammed. Then the only sound was the stove, and the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. I tried reading Over the Teacups in the Woman's Weekly. A chook cackled because it had laid an egg. Somewhere across the paddocks behind our place, a cow mooed. I must have slept because suddenly Uncle Trev was there in the kitchen too, and going through Mum's cake tins. I hadn't heard him come in. You've got to eat some scones first, I told him. Mum said so. In the tea towel on the rack. Date scones? Great. We'll have a cup of tea with them. Uncle Trev stood at the bench, getting the cups, keeping his back to me. I knew he was eating a piece of Mum's Louise cake because his ears were moving. He turned and grinned. I like that cake with coconut on top, he said. It's squashy and yet it's sort of crunchy too. Louise cake, I said. Mum will give it to you if she catches you eating it first. Oh, she's gone, he said. I was round the corner by the school and saw them heading off to Matamata in Mrs. Wilson's car, all jabbering 19 to the dozen, and not listening to a word the others were saying. I'll bet Mum saw you. Must say, Uncle Trev said, your mother makes a good date scone. Here, do you want me to butter one for you? Oh, no thanks. You said next time you came in you'd tell me about Mr. Burns and the Springs. Did I promise to tell you that? Uncle Trev looked surprised. I'll just butter a couple more of these scones and pour myself another cup of tea. I've been up since before daylight, and I forgot to have breakfast. There. Well, I don't know that there's much to tell. You said there's a story there. Did I? Well, perhaps I was thinking of something else. Oh yes, now I remember. Well, and Uncle Trev settled himself in Mum's chair, his cup without a saucer on the table beside him. He had a piece of Louise cake there too, sitting on the table without a plate. Mum would have been furious. Well, he said, years ago, a chap from over Te Aroha bought the Opal Springs out the back of Matamata. Years before, he'd diddled Billy Burns out of 20 quid, something to do with a horse, but he must have forgotten about that because when he bought Opal Springs, because he didn't recognise Billy when we went there for the swim. We were having a good time when the owner came down the steps and ordered Billy Burns out of the pool. What for? Oh, just some skylarking or other. You know what Billy Burns is like. Then he kicked me out too. Why? Oh, I can't remember for the life of me. Anyhow, that's not what the story's about. Mum said it served you both right, being kicked out for what you did. She says you were always up to some mischief or other, you and that Billy Burns. Well, perhaps you'd better get her to tell you the rest of the story, said Uncle Trev. She won't. What did you do? Well, we'd gone fishing over at Tauranga. Billy Burns had caught an ugly old hammerhead shark, about 3 times as long as you, and we brought it home in the dark and slipped it into the big pool at Opal Springs. Next day was a holiday, so a crowd turned up for a swim. They were horrified when they found a shark floating around in the pool, and they all went across the bridge to have a swim in the Crystal Springs on the other side of the river. The owner of Opal Springs, the man who diddled Billy Burns out of 20 quid, had ordered us out, had to drain his pool and scrub it with sand soap just to get rid of the pong of the shark. And what did he do with the shark? He slung it in the river, but Billy Burns put it round that he'd eaten it. Was it alive? It had been dead a few days by that time. Everybody stayed away from the Opal Springs after that. They said they didn't want to swim with the shark. People started sniffing when they went by the new owner. That's how Billy Burns got his own back. Was that all? Yeah. Oh, I said. Why? Said Uncle Trev, filling his pipe. Oh, nothing. I said. Mum says she's going to scrag you if she catches you smoking your pipe in the kitchen. I'll leave the back door open when I go, he said. She won't smell a thing. Yeah, but you know, Mum. Uncle Trev sighed and laid his pipe on the table. He drank some tea and took another piece of Louise cake. Well, he said, I just remembered there was a bit more to the story. That chap who owned Opal Springs, he hadn't worked out it was Billy Burns who put the old shark in his pool. He brooded about it and got an idea in his head. It was the owner of Crystal Springs who'd done it. Now he knew Billy Burns and I did a bit of fishing, and he put it to us he'd give us 20 quid for a decent-sized shark. We caught him a big mako and brought it over the Kaimais in the dark. We collected the money and scrammed. Next day we heard somebody had their foot bitten off by a mako shark in the Crystal Springs. Then the Matamata report had a report in which she had pulled her foot out just at the last minute. But the shark snipped off the tips of her toenails. You know how a mako shark's teeth are. Yeah, I said. Well, it clipped her toenails zigzag, like a dressmaker's scissors. After that, of course, everybody went back to the Opal Springs. A week later, somebody jumped in there and was grabbed by an octopus. 8 people went to his rescue. Well, did he die? Well, no, but it was only good luck. I'll just top up the teapot and have another piece of cake, said Uncle Trev. They put eels and stingrays in each other's pools. All sorts of fish turned up in them. People started going to the springs just to see what was in the water. Then a hippopotamus disappeared from the Auckland Zoo. Sure enough, a week later it was paddling around, chewing a bale of hay in the Opal Springs. The owner took one look, headed across the bridge to have it out with the owner of the Crystal Springs. They ran into each other in the middle of the bridge, because he was coming across to the Opal owner, but a giant anaconda, one of those swimming snakes he'd seen, just found in his pool. Well, what happened? They had a scrap in the middle of the bridge and fell into the river. A crocodile downstream ate the pair of them. There aren't any crocodiles in the Waiho, I said. Well, that's what most people thought. Uncle Trev stood and brushed the crumbs off his waistcoat onto the hearth. Well, I'd better be on my way, he said. He lit his pipe and called cheerio from the back door. I must have gone to sleep, because I remember his truck starting, and the next thing I knew, the car door slammed, and Mum called goodbye to somebody. She came clicking along the side of the house in her good shoes, the ones with the heels, and as she came in the door she sniffed and said, That uncle of yours has been here. I can smell his pipe. I told him you'd scrag him, so he let it go out, I said. He's eaten every piece of Louise cake in the tin, said my mother. I made him eat the scones first. He'd had nothing for breakfast. I saw him, Mum said, skulking around the school corner, talking to that friend of his, that Billy Burns, just waiting for me to go out. I'm surprised he didn't bring him in to help empty my tins. Anyway, she said, we had a lovely sale. I bought this material for your dressing gown. Here, feel it, and try on these slippers. Mrs. Spence said I can return them if they're not big enough. And what's in the bag? I asked. Mum hesitated. I bought myself a hat, she said. Her voice was a little loud. She sounded like Uncle Trev when I caught him eating the Louise cake. Well, she said, it's years since I had a new hat, and there's 3 weddings coming up this winter. Well, let's see it on, I said. She went out to her dressing table and came back wearing the new hat. I said I thought it would go well with her new costume. Oh, do you really think so? Mum said. Yeah, the green feather will pick up the green flecks in your costume, I said. I'd once heard her say something much the same to Mrs. Wilson. Mum, I said, do you think there are any crocodiles in the Waiho? I'll give that man what for when I see him next, Mum exploded. What's he been telling you now? Filling your head with stories about crocodiles. I noticed she seemed quite pleased to have got off the subject of her new hat. He didn't say anything, I said. I just wondered, that's all. There's something in over the teacups about cleaning a crocodile skin handbag. Mum lifted off her new hat with both hands. She put it away in her room and came back with a cake tin. I knew he'd eat all the cake, she said, so I hid this in the wardrobe. He'd make a meal of cake, that man, if you let him. Now, she said, I'll just measure your arms with the kettles coming to the boil. They're sure to have grown while you've been in bed all this time. The kettle sang on the stove. I held out my arm, Mum measured it. She held up the material against me, looked at it with her head on one side. My arm's tired, I said. Oh, you can put it down again, Mum said. I'll give him crocodiles. Just see if I don't." She was speaking through a mouthful of pins. "Next thing he'll be telling you there's sharks in the springs." I said nothing. I remembered I'd forgotten to remind Uncle Trev about the potatoes. It was best not to annoy Mum when she was making clothes, or she might stick a pin into me. "Kettle's boiling," I said. "Can I make the tea?"